Betrayed by her husband, abandoned by her son, stripped of everything she once called home, yet Harriet didn't break, she rose. Today, we honor the quiet power of a woman who chose justice over silence and dignity over defeat. Welcome to her Fireside Stories, wishing you a wonderful listening experience. I never imagined my own flesh and blood. My son would one day stand there cold and stone-faced and tell me to leave the home I helped build. But that's exactly what happened on a humid summer afternoon when I was told I was no longer welcome under the same roof as my son Jacob and his pristine new wife Elena. Everything I had ever sacrificed, my health, my youth, my dreams, now counted for nothing in their eyes. The worst part wasn't even Jacob's betrayal. Though it cut me so deeply, I thought my heart would never mend. The real torment came from seeing Elena smirk at me in silent victory, like she had just claimed a treasure she barely knew existed. One moment I was Harriet Thompson, a dedicated mother and wife for nearly 4 decades. The next, I was just Harriet, an unwanted guest, a stumbling block in their perfect story. It was a flash of lightning in my life, short and violent, setting the stage for every seismic shift that followed. What made it worse was how calmly Jacob told me to gather my things. He kept his voice steady, a faint quiver betraying only a shred of hesitation. "Mom," he said, "Elena deserves more respect, and you're standing in the way of that." The words echoed as if I stood in an empty concert hall. Respect. I'd spent a lifetime washing his clothes, cooking his meals, nursing him through fevers and heartbreaks. For a heartbeat, I almost laughed at the absurdity. Then I saw his eyes. He meant it. There was no space for me in his new life. Not if I refused to bow down to his wife's demands and illusions of grandeur. I left that day with only a small suitcase. My short, wavy silver hair was pinned in place by a single barrette, and I remember feeling more naked than I'd ever been in my life. My husband, well, my soon-to-be ex-husband, Donovan Parker, had orchestrated this entire fiasco from the sidelines. For years, his salt and pepper hair parted neatly to the side gave him the guise of a respectable businessman. In truth, his every step was lined with secrets, each of which I was about to uncover one by one. I can still see the day. Donovan entered my life all self-assured handshakes and confident smiles. Back then, I was Harriet Brooks, fresh out of community college, with a dream of becoming a teacher. My mother left me a small patch of wooded land as a legacy. I had short, wavy hair, even in those days, though not silver yet, and an eagerness to build a life on my own terms. Donovan's ambitions drew me in like a moth to light. He talked about opening clinics and advancing healthcare in underserved communities. His compassion seemed genuine, a beacon that gave me hope for a better future. I invested my small inheritance in his first medical venture, never doubting for a second that we were building something meaningful together. Over the years, I wore many hats: personal assistant, clinic manager, accountant, wife, and eventually mother. To Jacob, Donovan's business thrived. He expanded from a single clinic to multiple healthcare centers around our city. By the time Jacob was in middle school, Donovan's name was plastered on billboards and magazines hailing him as a visionary in the healthcare field. Yet behind that shining exterior was a man whose priorities were as fickle as the wind. While I was changing diapers, scrubbing floors, and managing finances after hours, Donovan was off shaking hands with investors, each partnership a rung up the ladder of his status. When Jacob was a child, I was the one who braided his scruffy undercut when he couldn't be bothered to comb. It stayed up late to help him with homework and took him to the park on weekends. Donovan adored the spotlight, but fatherhood was an afterthought. I always believed my devotion would pay off in a richer, more united family. But as time passed, small cracks began to appear in our carefully constructed life. Donovan increasingly treated me like an accessory. The homestead we shared gradually transformed from our home into Donovan's stage. It was only a matter of time before he found a new co-star to complete his perfect tableau. Jacob was my saving grace. For a time, the reason I tolerated Donovan's distance. As a teenager, Jacob displayed a charming awkwardness. He had an interest in computers and building model planes. I encouraged these hobbies, believing a sturdy pastime could shape his future. Even when Donovan was absent, I made sure Jacob never felt the sting of his father's aloofness. But eventually, Jacob absorbed Donovan's worldview success at any cost image above all else. It didn't happen overnight, but slowly I watched the boy who used to bring me homemade Mother's Day cards morph into a man who snubbed me when business associates were around. When Jacob met Elena at one of Donovan's corporate events, she with her chic pixie cut and taste for expensive champagne, I had no inkling how drastically life would change. Elena charmed us all at first. She'd flash that impeccable smile and her bright laugh turned heads wherever she went. She spoke of philanthropic dreams, claiming she wanted to work with Donovan on charitable expansions of his clinics. I supported their relationship, praying Jacob had found someone who could add softness to his hardened edges. Little did I know that her real ambition was to climb the social ladder, just like Donovan had. I realized too late that I was in the way of her ascent. Elena's presence became all-consuming after she married Jacob. She inserted herself into Donovan's business affairs, rearranged household routines, and even dictated which friends Jacob should keep. In a shockingly short time, she seemed to earn more trust from Donovan than I ever had. It felt like I was a relic from a past he'd rather forget, a relic he was willing to shove aside. And then came the day Jacob told me to leave, insisting that my old-fashioned ways clashed with Elena's modern vision. Thank you for following along so far. Let me know your thoughts. Comment 1 if you're enjoying the story, or 2 if you think it could be improved. And where are you reading this from? I'd love to know. It was early evening when I officially left my own home. I slipped on a pair of worn-out loafers, grabbed a small suitcase, and walked through the front door that used to welcome me with warmth and comfort. No one stopped me. The corridor lights were dim, casting long shadows that felt unnervingly symbolic. I paused once at the threshold, thinking maybe Jacob would rush to call me back. But he didn't. The only sound was the dull hum of the central air conditioning, a sound that suddenly felt foreign, as though it belonged to someone else's house. Outside, the cicadas screeched and the moon hovered lazily in the summer sky. A taxi I had called earlier pulled up at the curb, its headlights slicing through the dusk. I slid into the back seat, letting the door close with a finality that made my heart lurch. As the car pulled away, I didn't look back at the looming silhouette of the house. I felt hollow like a seashell with the living creature scooped out. A chapter of my life had ended without so much as a proper goodbye. Maybe I could have resisted, demanded my rights. But in that moment, my mind was a hurricane of conflicting emotions, betrayal, confusion, shame, and a flicker of dark rage. I was leaving with nearly nothing, yet somehow I sensed this might be an odd blessing in disguise. The more distance I put between myself and Donovan's world, the clearer it might become how deeply I'd been wronged. My next stop was my friend Marian's place. Marian, with her layered bob and quick wit, had always been more of a sister than a friend. She'd warned me for years that Donovan's ambition overshadowed his loyalty, but I'd plugged my ears. Arriving at Marian's door, I suddenly felt a wave of embarrassment, as though my failure as a wife and mother was on display. Still, she opened the door without judgment. "I've got coffee in the pot," she said, simply stepping aside to let me in. I might have lost my home, but at least one person in this city still remembered I existed. Marian's spare bedroom smelled of mothballs and old memories. She'd inherited this house from her grandmother, and some parts of it, like the antique wooden dresser, hadn't changed since the 1950s. Yet the presence of her warm laughter, the stacks of books she devoured weekly, and the half-finished knitting projects scattered about made the place feel alive. A practical woman. Marian didn't mince words. "You can stay as long as you need," she said, her voice husky with concern. "But you won't stay in this mess. I know you, Harriet. You'll want answers." Answers. The word echoed in my mind. I thought about how I had dedicated every spare cent of my mother's legacy to Donovan's healthcare initiatives. I had believed wholeheartedly in his vision, how he promised to open clinics in underserved neighborhoods, how he talked about bridging gaps in public health. Even after I realized he was more interested in personal acclaim, I stayed. I told myself I was being patient, supportive, not wanting to tear down the good we had built. But after Jacob and Elena forced me out, I began to wonder what exactly had I built and how many of the foundations, financial or otherwise, were still in my name, if any. The nagging suspicion that Donovan had twisted legal documents took root, whispering that I might have no stake left in his so-called empire. The day I left, Donovan handed me a tiny check laughably small compared to the decades of work and sacrifice. He tried to frame it as an act of generosity. If he truly felt generous, why not write a larger sum? Why not ensure I had real security? Spending those first few nights at Marian's, I tossed and turned, my short silver hair frizzing against the pillow from the heat and stress. Sleep was impossible. I'd close my eyes and see Jacob's face, impassive, determined, almost robotic, as he told me to leave. I heard Elena's laugh echo in my dreams, that high-pitched confidence that I once admired. Now it felt like a dagger. Something inside me snapped. I couldn't remain a silent casualty any longer. My mother's land, the modest wooded acreage left to me in her will, kept popping into my mind years ago. Donovan suggested I sign a few papers to streamline the acquisition of his first clinic. I never saw those documents again, and I never questioned him. At the time, I was juggling Jacob's school activities, household chores, and part-time bookkeeping at Donovan's office. He'd breeze in with a pen, say, "Sign here, Harriet." It's just a formality. I trusted him. But now I was haunted by the possibility that I'd unknowingly handed over rights to that land. Was it just a formality, or had he tricked me? Determined to find out, I spent an entire day hunting for any old papers or bank statements I might have stored away. Marian's dusty attic was the first place I searched. Under a broken lamp and piles of yellowed newspapers, I unearthed boxes of my old files. My heart pounded as I opened them, half dreading what I might discover. Sure enough, the references to the land were missing key documents. Just enough remained to remind me the property existed, but there was no official record of its current ownership. That night, I paced around the kitchen, my feet aching on the checkered linoleum floor. Marian brewed us a pot of chamomile tea and sat me down. "You need legal help," she said simply. She was right. I recalled an old college roommate named Lydia Brooks, now a reputable attorney with a reputation for championing elderly clients and victims of fraud. We had only exchanged holiday greetings and birthday messages for years, but I still considered her a trusted friend. I sent Lydia an email that very night, attaching what few documents I had. My hands trembled as I typed. Each keystroke felt like stepping onto a battlefield. I wasn't sure I could win. Lydia responded within hours. Her email was brief but direct. "We should meet soon. There's more here than meets the eye." The next morning, I made my way to Lydia's law office, a small brick building in the historical district. She greeted me with a hug. Her tight curls bounced as she walked, her practical shoes clacking against polished floors. I could see the intensity in her eyes, the look of someone preparing for battle on my behalf. We sat at her large mahogany desk, sunlight streaming through half-drawn blinds. I handed her every scrap of evidence I had, from old bank statements to scribbled notes. She took her time examining them. Occasionally, she'd pause, make a note, and ask a clarifying question. I told her about the land, about the check Donovan gave me, about how I'd quietly suspected foul play for years, but had no concrete proof. Now, with Jacob and Elena forcibly removing me from my home, I was done ignoring the obvious. Lydia nodded gravely. Donovan is smart. A classic pattern presenting legal papers as routine forging signatures when it suits him, taking advantage of your trust, Harriet. This is not just emotional betrayal, this might be criminal. A chill ran through me as she described how such actions could constitute fraud, possibly even more serious offenses if she uncovered additional forged documents. She spoke of the possibility of taking him to court seeking damages and regaining what was rightfully mine, but each step sounded terrifyingly public. Donovan thrived on publicity bending narratives to his advantage. Could I handle the scrutiny, the name-calling, the humiliations? As much as I wanted justice, the thought of confronting him on a public stage made my stomach twist. Still, I refused to be reduced to a helpless victim. I want to fight, I told Lydia, but I want to do it on my terms, quietly if possible. Her lips curved into a small smile. Sometimes the quietest approach is the most dangerous. Let's gather everything first, then we'll decide how to strike. I left her office feeling lighter but more resolved than ever. Donovan and Jacob wanted me gone. Fine, but I would not remain silent. That evening back at Marian's, we converted her cluttered dining table into a makeshift war room. Spreadsheets, folders, and manila envelopes were scattered in every direction. Lydia had emailed me a list of documents she needed: property deeds, land transfers, any note that mentioned my mother's property. If Donovan had forged my signature, there would be evidence somewhere. I brewed a pot of coffee and rolled up my sleeves, ignoring the nagging ache in my shoulders. Piece by piece, I reconstructed the timeline of Donovan's career. It turned out that the foundation of his very first clinic had more ties to my mother's land than I realized. Old loan papers hinted he'd used the property as collateral, but I never saw a cent from that or any subsequent expansions. Photos from groundbreaking ceremonies showed Donovan smiling with local politicians, crediting his own financial acumen and philanthropic heart. I found not a single mention of me, the woman who had propped him up in the early years and kept the finances afloat when no bank believed in him. Marian helped me comb through everything, her layered bob swaying as she shook her head at each fresh discovery. He's a piece of work, she muttered more than once. I felt a strange mixture of anger and relief. Anger because I'd been blind for so long. Relief because now I could see the tangled threads connecting Donovan's empire to my stolen inheritance. If we unraveled them carefully, he'd have no place to hide. I slept sparingly those nights. Every time I closed my eyes, I pictured Donovan's smug grin, Jacob's unblinking stare, Elena's triumphant smirk. But dawn brought a sense of renewed purpose. With every document I analyzed, I found more reasons to keep going. The Harriet Thompson who once stood behind Donovan at press events, smiling politely, was gone. In her place stood a woman determined to reclaim everything that was taken from her. 2 weeks into our investigation, I received an unexpected text from Jacob. "Can we talk?" My heart fluttered, torn between motherly love and righteous indignation. Was it another scheme to manipulate me? Still, I agreed to meet him at a quiet cafe downtown, if only to hear him out. When he walked in, I almost didn't recognize him. He'd lost weight, his scruffy undercut was trimmed shorter and dark circles hung under his eyes. He sat down across from me, looking more unsure of himself than I'd seen since he was a child learning to ride a bike. He hesitated, then said, "Mom, Elena and I have been having issues. She thinks your sudden disappearance is impacting Donovan's reputation. Investors are spooked, Dad's furious, and everyone's blaming each other." He sipped his coffee, avoiding my gaze. "I just wanted to know, did you really leak any documents to the press?" His question stung. "Jacob, I haven't done anything publicly yet. I've just gathered evidence. Evidence that your father lied to me for years." I watched him flinch. Did some part of him already suspect the truth? He swallowed hard. Elena says we need to minimize the damage, that if this gets bigger, it'll hurt my future as well. She wanted me to convince you to let it go. He finally lifted his eyes to meet mine, and for a moment I glimpsed the boy who once laughed at my silly jokes and insisted I tuck him in at night. I took a deep breath, calm but firm. Jacob, your wife is worried about her own standing, not mine. And your father is the one who created this mess. I didn't forge signatures. I didn't steal land. I paused, letting him feel the weight of my words. I don't want to hurt anyone, but I also won't be erased. That conversation with Jacob ended in a stalemate. He didn't apologize, but he also didn't threaten me outright. He just stared at me with an expression that hovered between guilt and confusion, then mumbled something about family ties, and left. I walked away feeling a pang of regret for the boy I used to know, but also a surge of conviction. I was doing the right thing by exposing Donovan. The next day, Lydia called with news. I've been digging into public records, she said. Donovan filed for an extension on one of his clinics using property under your mother's name as collateral. The signatures are definitely suspicious. She paused, her voice low. This is big, Harriet. We could press charges. We could send him to prison if this pans out. My stomach churned. Prison? Did I hate Donovan enough to want him behind bars? The line between hatred and a demand for accountability was blurry. But I also thought about my mother's final wishes, how she had entrusted me with her land as a sanctuary. For Donovan to manipulate that gift for his personal gain was a betrayal that clung to my mind like a sticky residue. If that's what it takes for him to face consequences, so be it, I replied, surprised by how resolute I sounded. Lydia then suggested a strategic approach. Donovan thrives on public image. If we quietly leak enough evidence to raise questions, we might not even need a lengthy trial. Shareholders, board members, and investors will back away. The empire will crumble from within. You'll have more bargaining power without stepping foot in a courtroom. The plan made sense. Donovan had always feared scandal more than legal battles. He believed he could charm or bribe his way through legalities. But public disgrace was the stuff of his nightmares. That night, I started drafting emails to a few local journalists. Known for investigative work, I didn't sign my name. I simply attached a scanned deed with questionable signatures and wrote, "There's more to this story than you realize." It wasn't a grand announcement, but a whisper in the dark. Sometimes a whisper is all it takes to unravel a fortress. In the days that followed, I continued working with Marian's help, cross-referencing every clue. For the first time, the story of Donovan's meteoric rise came into crystal-clear focus, a tapestry of strategic half-truths, forged documents, and my uncredited support. He had always been the face of success, but I was the backbone, the scaffolding that sustained his empire. Realizing that truth stung. I had been complicit in my own erasure, out of love, out of loyalty, out of a desire to see my family thrive. Meanwhile, I heard rumors that Elena was scrambling to protect her image. She'd been spotted at high-end boutiques returning designer purchases, likely an attempt to show modest spending patterns, or maybe to build a financial cushion in case Donovan's empire collapsed. It was a stark contrast to the glitzy persona she once flaunted at galas. Her stylish pixie cut, once a symbol of her sharp confidence, now appeared more like a frantic disguise as she navigated the city alone. Donovan himself was nowhere to be found in public. The man who once sought every camera lens now cowered behind private gates. My routine was simple. I'd wake up early, help Marian tidy up, and spend a good portion of the day collecting more evidence or meeting with Lydia. Some mornings I visited the library to print out records, losing myself briefly in the dusty charm of old volumes. There, I would chat with Ms. Bernice, an elderly volunteer who wore her silver hair in long braids. Her gentle smile and warm chatter reminded me of a world outside this storm. I found it oddly comforting to be among the shelves, where every book told a story. Mine was just one of many stories of betrayal and triumph that humanity had penned over centuries. But at night, the tension returned. The weight of what I was doing, bringing down the father of my child. The man I once loved wasn't lost on me, yet each memory of Jacob's rejection, each recollection of Donovan's sly grin, and each realization of Elena's calculated ambition fueled me forward. And then it happened, the first public hint that Donovan's empire might be built on shaky ground. A small business blog published an expose questioning the ownership transfer of certain clinics. They didn't name Donovan outright, but the clues were unmistakable for anyone who knew the local healthcare scene. The blog post mentioned questionable signatures, a forged power of attorney, and a suspicious pattern of land usage. Within hours, online chatter erupted. Some defended the unnamed mogul, while others shared stories of alleged malpractice or shady dealings they'd witnessed over the years. Lydia called me that same evening, practically buzzing with excitement. "This is good, Harriet," she said. "Once bigger outlets see this, they'll pounce on it like sharks. Donovan's PR team will either scramble or fail to respond fast enough," she advised. I stay quiet, let the rumor mill spin. I trusted her judgment. The last thing I wanted was to appear vindictive. The evidence would speak for itself. Sure enough, by the next day, Donovan's name was trending on local social media channels, with accusations flying left and right. A local television station put out a teaser for an upcoming investigative segment. Is our city's healthcare hero hiding a dark secret? That was all it took. Over the next week, more allegations surfaced. Some were credible, others baseless, but each one chipped away at Donovan's once unassailable reputation. What do you think about exposing the truth through the media? As the frenzy grew, I watched from Marian's living room with a cup of tea, a strange calm settling over me. My son had cast me aside for Elena's sake, and Donovan had orchestrated my downfall. Yet here I was, quietly pulling the strings of truth. This wasn't about revenge anymore. It was about restoring my identity, reasserting that I was the rightful heir to my mother's land, and showing Jacob that a mother's strength isn't so easily dismissed. When Donovan finally broke his silence, he posted a defensive message online, claiming he was the victim of a smear campaign. He blamed disgruntled ex-employees and faceless adversaries for circulating fabricated documents. The statement was laced with grandiose language, typical of a man who'd never faced real consequences. No apology, no admission of guilt, just belligerent denial. It might have worked a few years ago, but public sentiment was turning against him. People wanted answers. Investors started distancing themselves. Even local charities he once donated to began removing his name from plaques and sponsorship letters. I thought back to the dozens of black tie events we attended together. How Donovan would strut across the stage with his salt and pepper hair, impeccably styled, delivering speeches about integrity, community, and responsibility. I recalled how I'd stand in the audience, my short, wavy hair carefully set, beaming with pride. Each memory hurt like pressing on a bruise, but I was strangely grateful for that pain. It reminded me why I had to finish what I started. Jacob called me again, his tone more urgent this time. "Mom," he said, "whatever's happening, it's spiraling. Dad is furious. Elena's upset and I'm caught in the middle." I took a breath. "No, Jacob. You put yourself in the middle when you kicked me out. I didn't ask for this." "Your father's actions led here." He was silent for a moment. "Can't you just sign something? Some kind of statement that says you didn't know about the documents, that Dad never took advantage of your mother's land?" The request stunned me, Even now, with the truth looming, he wanted to salvage Donovan's reputation. As if my voice could magically undo the chain of fraud. "I won't lie," I said sharply. "If your father wants to talk, he can find me himself." I hung up, heart pounding. Maybe part of me hoped he'd say, "I'm sorry, Mom, I was wrong." But that day never seemed to come. The avalanche of revelations soon became too large for Donovan to control. Journalists dug deeper. They discovered inconsistencies in the property deeds, particularly around the time Donovan built his very first clinic. One news segment aired a side-by-side comparison of signatures on official documents. The newscaster pointed out how the Harriet Thompson signature changed inexplicably from one document to another. Experts they interviewed called it a likely forgery. My phone buzzed nonstop that night. Acquaintances I hadn't heard from in years reached out asking if I was all right. Even Elena couldn't remain silent. She made a statement through a lawyer disclosing that she had no involvement in any questionable transactions and had full faith in Donovan's eventual vindication. But behind the scenes, according to Lydia, Elena was preparing to separate her finances from his. She recognized the sinking ship. She was no fool, just opportunistic. The difference was that I had spent my life building with Donovan. Elena only saw him as a launching pad. Now she wanted to cut ties before she went down with him. Meanwhile, Lydia urged me to prepare for the possibility of a settlement. "Donovan might try to throw money at you to keep you silent," she warned. "If he does, you'll have the upper hand. We can negotiate for the return of your mother's land plus damages. Or we can go to court. It's up to you." I listened, uncertain of how far I was willing to push this. My anger yearned for justice. My heart ached for closure. But my mind kept drifting to Jacob, who had grown up in the same web of lies, albeit from a different vantage point. One evening, a memory flooded back the day my mother first showed me that wooded property. She described how the towering oaks and quiet creek reminded her of simpler times. "When life feels too heavy, find refuge here," she'd said, her voice as gentle as the breeze rustling through the leaves. The image of her warm smile spurred me on. I couldn't let Donovan stain that legacy any longer. Lydia set up a quiet meeting with Donovan's team at her office. I expected him to come in chest puffed out, attempting to intimidate everyone. Instead, he sent two lawyers, one sporting an expensive suit, the other clacking away on a laptop. Their goal was to gauge how much evidence we truly had, possibly to negotiate a hush-hush deal before more information reached the press. They were polite but cagey, offering vague statements like, "Mr. Parker wishes to resolve any misunderstandings amicably." I sat there, arms crossed, letting Lydia take the lead. She presented just enough proof to show we weren't bluffing: a forged signature on a property deed, an illegally notarized document, a suspicious bank transfer. Their faces paled as she laid out each piece of the puzzle. At one point, one lawyer blurted, "This can't be used in court." Mrs. Parker likely consented informally. The word Mrs. Parker made my jaw tighten. I corrected him. "Miss Thompson," I said firmly. "And no, I never gave consent." The meeting ended abruptly with Donovan's lawyer saying they'd confer with their client. As we left, Lydia turned to me, eyebrows arched in satisfaction. "They're rattled," she said. "That's good. Now they know you're not just an angry ex. You're a ticking time bomb with the truth on your side." She was right. For the first time since Jacob kicked me out, I felt not just righteous anger, but also a flicker of hope. Donovan could hide behind lawyers' press releases and his new wife's public persona, but the facts were closing in around him. That night, I found myself alone in Marian's guest room, staring at the ceiling. The sense of impending confrontation weighed on me. Jacob's betrayal still stung. Donovan's cunning fueled my determination, and Elena's calculated maneuvers disgusted me. But the finish line was in sight. One way or another, the truth would prevail. By the end of the month, Donovan's lawyers reached out directly to Lydia. Their tone had shifted from arrogant dismissal to urgent negotiation. Donovan wanted a face-to-face meeting with me. Alone, he specified, believing he could outmaneuver me without Lydia present. Lydia and Marian both advised against it, but I felt a tug of curiosity. Perhaps I needed to see the man I once loved for who he truly was, laid bare by his own deceit. We agreed to meet at a neutral location, a modest conference room in a small downtown building. The space was unremarkable with beige walls and mismatched chairs, a stark contrast to the polished offices where Donovan usually sealed his deals. I arrived first wearing a simple black dress and low heels. No more letting him see me as timid or broken. He walked in his salt and pepper hair, disheveled a 5 o'clock shadow, making him look older than I remembered. For a moment, I almost felt pity. Then I recalled how easily he'd signed away my inheritance and manipulated my son against me. The pity evaporated like morning dew under the sun. Harriet, he began, trying to slip into that smooth tone he once used to charm me. We don't have to do this. We can settle this privately. I'll make sure you're financially secure. I'll give you a generous payout, more than you'd ever get from selling that land. You just need to walk away from these accusations. I folded my arms. Walk away from the truth. You want me to pretend you didn't forge my name and steal my mother's legacy? He sighed heavily as if I were being unreasonable. These are just technicalities, Harriet. You know how business works. Sometimes we cut corners. Cut corners, I interrupted, voice rising. Is that what you call forging signatures and lying to our family? His facade slipped for a second. I saw real fear in his eyes. If you push this, everything I've built will collapse. You'll get no money, no restitution. And what about Jacob? He hissed. He'll be left with nothing. I stared at him, appalled. You're using Jacob as a bargaining chip now. Donovan clenched his jaw. He's my son, Harriet, and yours. You want his future destroyed, the nerve of him trying to wrap his greed in fatherly concern. My mind flashed back to the countless nights Donovan didn't bother to come home. The birthdays he forgot, the time he stood me and Jacob up at a father-son event because a golf meeting ran late. His fatherly devotion had always been a facade. I kept my voice steady. My son already destroyed our relationship when he told me to leave, and that was your influence. I won't sacrifice my dignity to salvage something you never genuinely cared about. Donovan's cheeks flushed. Then what do you want? He asked, exasperated. I reached into my folder and pulled out a crisp sheet of paper. First, I want the transfer of my mother's land reversed, legally, fully, without contest. Second, I want a formal public acknowledgement that you forged signatures on numerous documents. And third, I want restitution for the financial and emotional damage you caused me. My heart hammered as I spoke, but I refused to let my composure slip. This was my line in the sand. Donovan's shoulders sagged. He looked at me as if seeing me for the first time, realizing I was no longer the quiet woman standing behind him. Public acknowledgement, he muttered. Harriet, you're pushing me into a corner. I shrugged. You're the one who built walls of lies. I'm simply letting the truth tear them down. He said nothing for a long moment. Then he stood abruptly, his chair scraping the floor. I'll be in touch, he said, avoiding my gaze. I grabbed my purse. As I left the conference room, my short silver hair swayed gently with each step, and I felt the slightest quiver of triumph. Behind me, Donovan remained frozen in the middle of that drab room, confronting the fact that the person he once deemed irrelevant was now the biggest threat to his empire. When I recounted the meeting to Lydia, she nodded thoughtfully. He'll try to salvage whatever he can. Don't be surprised if he threatens you legally or tries to intimidate you in other ways. I understood Donovan was a cornered wolf capable of desperate measures, but I also felt a newfound sense of power. For once, I wasn't trembling in his presence. Word spread quickly. A major newspaper picked up the story, citing anonymous sources about Donovan's forged land deeds. Soon after, an investigative journalist reached out to me through Lydia requesting an interview. This time I said yes. If Donovan wanted to negotiate, he should do it after facing the public record of his actions. That interview aired on a local TV station one quiet Thursday night. They blurred my face and changed my voice at my request, but anyone who truly knew me would recognize the story. I laid out the facts piece by piece. I described the day Jacob kicked me out, how Donovan forged my signature, and how they both tried to strip me of my dignity. The interviewer asked if I harbored resentment. "I want justice," I replied, voice muffled but firm. "The rest is secondary. The fallout was immediate. More shareholders withdrew their support from Donovan's clinics. Elena, wanting to protect herself, released another statement through her lawyer, insisting she had no prior knowledge of forged documents. Watching it all unfold felt surreal. For decades, I lived in Donovan's shadow, unseen and unheard. Now my words, my truth had sent shockwaves through the very foundations he once controlled. At Marian's, we celebrated quietly with a simple dinner of spaghetti and wine. She clinked her glass against mine, her layered bob framing a proud grin. "You did it, Harriet." You forced his hand. I could only smile back, a knot of relief loosening in my chest. Justice was inching closer, but I knew I had one more confrontation ahead. Jacob. The next afternoon, Jacob showed up at Marian's doorstep unannounced. I opened the door and we stood there in awkward silence. Gone was the impeccably groomed young man with a crisp suit. His scruffy undercut looked unkempt, eyes ringed with weariness. "Mom," he said, voice cracking. He had never called Marian's house home, but it struck me how lost he appeared standing in an unfamiliar hallway with nowhere else to turn. I led him to the living room. He sat on the edge of the couch, hands clasped, shoulders tense. "Dad's losing everything," he finally said. "People are pulling out of partnerships. Investors are demanding refunds." "Elena, she packed her bags and left last night. She told me she couldn't handle the negative press." His voice broke at that last sentence, as though he still couldn't believe the reality of Elena's betrayal. A strange sympathy tugged at me despite everything. He was my son, and he looked like a frightened little boy. "I'm sorry she hurt you," I said quietly. He shook his head, tears brimming. "Why didn't you tell me everything before? About the documents, the land, everything Dad did." He demanded as if I were the one who kept secrets. Anger flared inside me because Jacob, you never asked. You were too busy chasing your father's approval or Elena's applause. And I was too used to being overlooked. He tried to speak, but I held up a hand. "I reached a breaking point when you told me I had to respect Elena more, that she deserved a place in the home I built. You chose their side without even hearing mine." He looked down at his feet, tears sliding onto his cheeks. "I'm sorry," he whispered. "I was wrong." I studied him, unsure if this was remorse or desperation. Maybe it didn't matter. A mother's love doesn't vanish, but trust doesn't rebuild overnight, Jacob. "I can't just forgive you like that. But I'm not shutting you out either. We'll see where this goes." Jacob stayed for dinner, picking at his food while Marian and I carried on casual conversation. He spoke up occasionally, asking cautious questions about the case against Donovan. I answered sparingly, not wanting him to relay sensitive details back to his father. Yet part of me sensed Jacob was genuinely confused, like someone waking up from a dream only to find reality less forgiving. Marian offered him the couch for the night, which he accepted with a weary nod. After the dishes were done, Marian pulled me aside. "He's hurting Harriet. Be careful, I don't want you to get entangled again if he's just looking for a soft landing." I nodded, appreciating her bluntness. Over the years, I'd learned that the ones closest to Donovan were adept at emotional manipulation. But Jacob was my son, a fact that kept me tethered to him in ways I couldn't untangle. The next morning, I woke early to find Jacob already dressed. hair still a mess, eyes red from lack of sleep. "I'm gonna see Dad," he said, voice hoarse. "Maybe I can reason with him, convince him to do the right thing. Sign the land back over to you. Stop all the lies," I stilled. "And what if he refuses?" Jacob's expression hardened. "Then I'm done with him, I promise." He reached out to squeeze my hand, an unspoken question in his eyes. "Will you still be my mother through all this?" I gave a slight nod. No matter what, he was still my child. I spent the rest of the morning on the phone with Lydia, preparing for any new twists. She told me Donovan's lawyers had proposed a settlement. It included a sizable sum and a promise to relinquish claims on my mother's land. In exchange, I'd have to sign a non-disclosure agreement, promising never to speak publicly about the forged documents again. Lydia asked if I wanted to move forward. My chest tightened. Silence. They wanted to buy my silence again. After everything Donovan did was a bag of money enough to wash away 4 decades of betrayal. I met Lydia at her office later that day. She laid out the settlement offer on the table. The amount was undoubtedly large enough for me to live comfortably for the rest of my life. But the condition of silence weighed on me like a boulder. I thought about all the women in similar positions, coerced into quiet by legal intimidation or the lure of a fat check. I thought about my mother's last words to me, how she wanted the land to be a refuge if the world ever became too harsh. I also thought about the quiet injustice of forging a signature and stealing someone's inheritance, how Donovan had gotten away with it for so long because I'd never spoken up. Lydia watched me with concern. "If you take the settlement," she said gently, "you'll get the land back. You can do whatever you want with it. Donovan's name will be cleared of further legal scrutiny, though public opinion might still condemn him. He's banking on enough hush money to keep you from talking to reporters or pressing charges." I closed my eyes and saw a flash of Jacob's face, the heartbreak in his eyes when he realized Elena had left him, the confusion he felt about how deep Donovan's manipulations ran. Could I betray that vulnerability by letting Donovan rewrite the narrative yet again? My short silver hair brushed my cheeks as I slowly shook my head. "Tell Donovan I won't sign," I said at last. "I want my land, but I'm not agreeing to any non-disclosure. If that means going to court, then so be it." Lydia smiled, relieved. "I support you, Harriet, and I think the public will too, once the truth is fully laid out." With that decision made, I braced myself. Donovan would no longer see me as a former partner, but a formidable adversary, and if I knew him at all, he wouldn't give up without a fight. The following week was a whirlwind. Journalists kept digging, uncovering more incriminating details about Donovan's expansion strategies, questionable loan approvals, and even allegations of hush money paid to former employees. It was like watching a grand sandcastle collapse under relentless waves. Donovan tried to control the narrative with more statements, but each one only spurred new questions. Investors launched internal audits. Local officials hinted at investigations, and the city's chatter turned from admiration of Donovan's genius to disbelief at his audacity. Jacob stopped by Marian's again, this time looking more resolved. "Dad said it's all lies," he told me, flatly, "that you're being influenced by unscrupulous lawyers." He shifted his feet, eyes flicking up to meet mine. "But I know that's not true, Mom." I asked him point blank about the land deed. He avoided the question. That told me everything I needed to know. He reached into his bag and pulled out a folder. Inside were copies of letters, some from Donovan's office, some from banks. "I found these in his study," Jacob explained. They outlined the early stages of Donovan's clinic expansions, detailing how collateral from Mrs. Harriet Parker had been used. The signatures were obviously forged. The date placed them at a time when I was bedridden after an appendectomy. Jacob's hand shook as he flipped through the pages. "Why would he do this to you? To us?" I sighed, painfully aware that my son was grappling with the realization his father was not the hero he'd always idolized. Power, I said simply. Greed, a desperate need for admiration. I didn't see the full extent of it either until recently. Jacob closed the folder, tears threatening again. I'm sorry, Mom. I should have been there for you. I touched his arm gently. We can't change what happened, but we can decide what happens next. That night, the City News Network led with a special segment titled Healthcare Mogul's House of Cards. They showed Donovan's old interviews side by side with the newly uncovered documents. The anchor concluded with, the question remains, how far can one man go before his deceptions unravel? I sat on Marian's couch, sipping hot tea, feeling a strange mix of sadness and vindication. Amid the growing storm, a quiet dream emerged in my mind. What if I turned my mother's land into a place of healing, not just for me, but for others? The notion came as I flipped through an old family album one evening. My mother, with her kind eyes and gentle smile, had always believed that compassion could mend even the deepest wounds. She told me once that land wasn't just property, it was a sanctuary for weary souls. With that inspiration, I began sketching ideas, a small retreat center, maybe a local library extension, or a community garden where people could find solace. The plan was vague, but it soothed me. It reminded me that after all the drama life would continue, I could build something new, something not tied to Donovan's name or reputation. While I was busy nursing that quiet hope, Lydia brought news Donovan's legal team sent another offer, no NDA this time. They were prepared to return the land and pay a smaller sum of restitution, likely because they knew a court battle would expose even more damaging evidence. Lydia and I scheduled a meeting to finalize details. It's almost over, she said, her voice tinged with triumph. Jacob decided to attend that meeting. I want to see this through. He told me, a determined edge in his voice. I glanced at him, proud and a bit heartbroken that it took a crisis for us to stand on the same side again. The day before the meeting, I visited my mother's old property. It was overgrown with wildflowers and tall grass. The creek still meandered peacefully through the trees. Standing there, I felt an almost spiritual release. This land was truly my inheritance, something neither Donovan nor Elena nor even Jacob could take from me ever again. The next morning, I tucked those visions into my heart, put on a simple blouse, tied back my short silver waves, and headed out. Whatever happened, I was determined to walk away with my dignity and my rightful inheritance intact. The final meeting took place in a stark conference room with neutral walls and a single potted plant in the corner. Donovan's eyes flicked toward me as I entered, but he didn't speak. His lawyer shuffled papers, trying to keep the atmosphere professional. Lydia offered a courteous nod and placed the new agreement on the table. Jacob stood by my side, arms folded, no longer shielding Donovan's pride. In the agreement, Donovan conceded the land back to me, free of any encumbrances. He also agreed to a restitution payment, less than the original hush money, but it came without the gag clause. I scanned the paperwork, heart pounding. Here was the culmination of everything: the stolen signatures, the heartbreak, the sleepless nights, the betrayal by my own son. And yet I felt more certain of myself than ever. Donovan looked thinner, his salt and pepper hair a disarray of stress. For a moment, our eyes met, and I saw a flash of regret, perhaps for losing control, perhaps for underestimating me all these years. I signed my name with a calm hand, then slid the document across the table. Donovan signed next, his pen shaking slightly. I didn't bother to speak because there was nothing left to say. Outside, the sky was a brilliant blue. Jacob walked beside me, silent but contemplative. "Mom," he finally said, voice trembling with emotion. "I'm sorry it took me so long to see what was happening. I guess I was blinded by Dad's success, by Elena's ambition." "I'm so sorry," I squeezed his hand gently. "We didn't need a grand gesture. We just needed the space to heal. And that's how Harriet Thompson reclaimed not only my mother's land, but my own identity in the months that followed. Donovan's clinics underwent restructuring. Elena disappeared from the city's social scene. Jacob made amends in small ways, sometimes visiting the property with me to plant flowers or to share cups of tea under the tall oaks. As for me, I channeled the restitution money into creating a modest wellness center on that land, a place where women could recover from trauma and rebuild their lives just as I did. Thank you so much for joining me tonight here at her Fireside Stories. What a powerful journey we've experienced. One woman's courageous stand against deceit, betrayal, and the heartbreaking abandonment by her own family in reclaiming her inheritance and removing her son's undeserved legacy. Harriet proved that strength doesn't always roar. Sometimes it whispers softly yet fiercely in the pursuit of justice. Now, I'd love to hear your thoughts. Was Harriet right to take back control so decisively? What would you have done in her shoes? Please leave your comments below and let me know where you watched from. Your voice truly matters to us. Remember, if you enjoyed this gripping narrative, subscribe to our channel, hit the notification bell, and share this story with someone who might find strength in its message. Until next time, keep the fires of storytelling burning brightly. Good night.